All right, so it looks like the pace of people joining here is slowing down. So maybe I'll get us started with some introductions. I know we got a set amount of time here today and want to make the most of it to make sure that we use our time well to learn as much as possible. So welcome everyone. We're so delighted that you were able to join for today's webinar and can learn a little bit about the national trends about what our students are saying to us from our surveys. Today we're going to be focused in particular on the 2021 survey of graduating undergraduate students. So my name is Tyler Hall. I'm currently serving as president of CUSC, and Nicholas from PRA is going to be giving us a bit of a walk through this morning or afternoon, depending on what time zone you're in, of some of the results and some of the highlights and things that we've learned this past year. I hope you're going to find it really interesting. I hope there's some good things that you can take away. Particularly if you participated this year, it might be some interesting things that you might want to dig into your own data and in terms of the master data set to see how your institution compares. So I hope there's some real practical takeaways for you as well. But I think even just if you weren't a participant, I think there's still a great deal that can be learned about some of the trends. Just a couple of housekeeping things for us here today. Probably as you go, you'll have some questions. You can feel free to just type your questions right into the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat as we go. Nicholas probably won't be monitoring the chat because he'll have plenty to do to keep on top of sharing some of the content for us, but we will be monitoring the chat for you. As well, at the end, there will be time for questions. And so if you want to speak and engage in that conversation, you can use the reactions button at the bottom and raise your hand, just like Nicholas has done just now. But we'll ask that we wait until the end of the presentation to invite you to speak. There will be time for that. But if you have questions that you don't want to forget, feel free to just plop them down in the chat and we will make sure that we address them as we go. So without any further ado, maybe I'll turn it over to Nicholas and we can begin today's content here for us. So Nicholas, take it away.
Great. Thank you very much, Tyler. So I'll be presenting on the 2021 graduating student survey. And as we go through, as Tyler mentioned, if you have questions, you feel free to put them in the chat. We'll address them when we get to the end. And there'll also be time for Q&A at the end. This is meant sort of as a general overview of the results from the 2021 graduating student survey. So I know some of you have probably participated in this survey. Some of you are viewing to look at the results. This presentation will be made online later. And of course, the report itself is available publicly through CUSC's website. And so this is the 27th, where does time go? This is the 27th cooperative study that's been undertaken by CUSC. And this year involves 32 universities from across Canada, which is the exact same number of universities that participated in the 2018 graduating student survey. As we go through the presentation, I do point out some differences between the current results in 2021 and the past iterations of the graduating student survey, so 2018 and 2015. But we do have to remember that not all the universities that participated are the same. So sometimes the differences we see are because of which universities are participating in a given year. However, I do think we do see some differences that we can be fairly certain that are probably due to circumstances related to the pandemic, as we'll see as we go through the results. So in this survey, almost 52,000 students from across Canada were invited to participate, of which just over 15,000 participated, which is a massive number. So at a national level, we can say that these results statistically very much represent the student experience. You could make arguments around the representation by region and certain types of universities, but just at an aggregate level, this is a very large and strong sample. The overall response rate was 30% with a wide range across universities. The response rate is actually on par, even slightly up from 2018 when the response rate was 29%. So haven't seen really any major change up or down there, and the pandemic didn't seem to drastically increase or decrease students' appetite for completing this survey. The results presented here in this report are weighted to match the size of the university. So not all universities did a census of their graduating students. They selected only a sample of them. And so results are weighted back to account for the fact that some universities did not necessarily do a census of their students to ensure that we're representing the population of those participating universities. Also, as we go through today's presentation, we do analyze results by a number of different factors. One of them is the size of the university. And so CUSC has historically looked at universities in three sizes. Group 1, which is typically small undergraduate universities. Group 2, which typically are medium-sized institutions that have some sort of graduate program, and Group 3, which are large universities, typically with a professional program, as well as typically a law or medical school. So let's take a look at the profile of our graduating students. And so 7% of our graduating students have children, 44% self-identify as being a visible minority, and 86% are Canadian citizens. The rest are made up by 8%, which are international students, and 5% are permanent residents. Gender split is about 2/3 female and about 1/3 male, which is fairly on par with the sample file that we received. So we're not over or underrepresenting gender in any way. The average age of students is about 24 years of age. This is actually about almost a full year higher on average than students from the 2018 survey. The average age for students in 2018 was 23.4 years, so a slightly older age. And again, this is likely impacted by the institutions that are participating in 2018 relative to 2015. 3% self-identify as Indigenous, and 65% are single. 24% say they are in some type of relationship, and 11% are married. So it seems like if you ever wanted to meet a partner, it seems like university would be the place to go, given the fact that 2/3 of students identify as being single. When we look at universities, you see some differences here by groups. Group 1 university students, so those would be the small universities, they do tend to be older than students who are attending Group 2 and Group 3 universities, and they're also less likely to identify as a visible minority. We also looked at 14% of students are first-generation students. So those are students who neither of their parents or guardian have attended any post-secondary. That is virtually unchanged from the 2018 and 2015 surveys, when it was 14% in 2018 and 13% in 2015. So we haven't seen a shift in first generation. So we've probably reached sort of the tipping point. If I go back to the early 2000s, that rate was typically almost a quarter, was around 20 to 25% of students were first generation. And we haven't really seen much of a change over the past 6 years. Conversely, on the other end, 18% of students have at least one parent who has a graduate degree, so a master's degree or higher. And so you do see a higher proportion of students whose parents have a advanced university background than those who have neither parent or guardian with any post-secondary. So when we look at disabilities and impairments, 27% of students self-identify as saying I have some sort of disability or impairment. Most commonly is a mental health issue. That's 17% of students. That's followed by a big drop off. Next is ADD at 6%, learning and memory at 4%, and then chronic conditions at another 4%. So though 27% of students self-identify as having some sort of disability or impairment, about 7% say their disability impairment affects them on a daily basis. And amongst those, again, it's still most commonly those who self-identify as having a mental health issue. We look at living arrangements. So where are graduating students living? More often, they're living with family. 51% are living with their family. That could be parents, that could be guardians, it could be other family members, and 30% are renting off campus. For those who are not living on campus, asked if they would live on campus if given the opportunity, about 1 in 5, 18% of students who aren't living on campus say they would do so if given the chance. In terms of how students are getting to and from school, it's almost an even split in terms of using public transit versus using a vehicle. Although 26% of students in this current survey said that they don't attend campus at all. So 1 in 4 students said they are not attending campus in any way. We do see some differences amongst these results by a few things. The older a student is, not surprisingly, the more likely they are to be living in their own home, less likely to be living with family. Students who self-identify as a member of a visible minority group are more likely than those who do not to say that they would live on campus if given a chance. 25% of students who self-identify as a visible minority say that they would want to live on campus if they're not currently doing it, compared to only 12% of students who do not identify. We also see some differences. The younger a student is, the more likely they are to be walking to school, so the less likely they are to be using other forms of transportation. And those who are older, they're less likely to be using public transportation or report that they're not attending campus at all. So looking at students' academic profile. So in terms of their academic profile, we see that 79% of students are attending full-time, and this is information that is provided by the institutions. This is actually lower than the past 2 graduating student surveys. 84% were attending full-time 2018, 82% in 2015. So the full-time status here is probably likely impacted by the pandemic in some way, shape, or form. The availability of classes, students perhaps not wanting to take classes online if they feel like an in-person experience would be their preferred method, so they may have reduced their course load simply just to take the courses in the way they wanted to take them. 40% of students report that they have an average grade of A- or higher, and 22% say they have transferred from another institution. Some differences here. The older a student is, the more likely they are to be attending university part-time. Amongst students who are graduating 21 and younger, 94% are attending full-time. For those, that drops down consistently by age group, down to just 45% attending full-time who are 30 and older. Also, the older a student is, the more likely they are to say they've transferred from another institution, and also the more likely they are to say that they've interrupted their studies. So looking at practical program experience, so 50% of students say that they have some work or learning experience through their program. So this is through their university. When we look how it breaks down, this to me doesn't really matter what it is students are saying. What it really is the fact that each university calls this something different. Some universities will call it a co-op or a practicum or a work experience, or different departments will call it something different. So this is really just a catch-all to say, hey, what are students doing? And so when you do look at your results, you're probably going to see differences between perhaps your institution and other institutions, and that's mainly because of probably what it is called within your university or within common departments that offer it. In terms of delays, students have experienced completing their program. 38% say they have experienced some type of delay. And they had a variety of options to choose from. The most common reason is that a required course that they need to graduate from their program was not available. Not available could mean many things. Could mean the course was not offered. Could mean the course that they want to take was full by the time they wanted to register for it. But that is the most common reason for delay. Grades falling second. Also, electives and financial issues are also there. There is a difference here by age. The older a student is, the more likely they are to have experienced a delay, which makes sense. If you're older and graduating, chances are you had some type of delay completing it. There also is a significant difference here by grade. The lower the student reports their grade to be, the more likely they are to report experiencing a delay. For example, only 25% of students who report an A- grade or higher experience some type of delay, compared to 73% of students who report a C+ grade or lower say they experience some type of delay. Activities. What are students doing? Well, in terms of their campus activities, this is what they did in the past year. So that is since September 2020. All of these results, if we go back and look at the 2018, 2015, are lower than they were in 2015 and 18. Not by as much as I would have expected. They are all down by about 2 to 3 percentage points. So for example, student clubs were typically around the 21, 22%, rec programs around 11, 12%. So everything's sort of down by about 2 to 3%. So not to the same extent as we might think of from the pandemic, but these are the activities that people reported. We do see some differences here by age. The younger a student is, the more likely they are to have participated in a student club. In terms of volunteering, so this is where we actually might see some offset around the campus activities and volunteering. So 33% of students indicated they had volunteered on or off campus. This is higher than 2018 or 2015. 2018, it was 24%. 2015, it was 25%. So perhaps students have taken some of the time that they may have spent on some of the extracurricular activities on campus and funneled this to volunteering activities. Typically, for those who volunteer, they report volunteering about 5 hours, 4.7 hours per week. This is on par-ish with previous results. This is just over 4, typically around 4.2, 4.5. So slightly higher, but they're not drastically increasing the number of hours, but we do see more students who are indicating that they are volunteering. In terms of their study hours, so what are students doing? So what are they doing in and out of class? So in terms of hours in class, this is the breakdown of students in terms of the proportion who are spending time in class and the proportion spent out of class. And so as you expect, they're spending more time on their studies inside and outside of class. When we break it down by the average hours they're spending about 20 hours outside of class, and they're spending about 13 hours in class. And I realize those colors are the opposite of each other. I thought I'd fix that, but turns out they're opposite. So let's pretend like those colors match. We do see some things here around students. Age plays a big factor in the hours spent, probably because, again, older students are more likely to be part-time. What we find is that students spend more time in class when they're younger than when they're older, primarily due to the fact they're part-time, but the hours they spend outside are not that different. It's interesting. So older students are spending less time in class because they're more likely to be going part-time, but the hours they're spending outside of class are very, very similar. And so older students, the ratio of in to outside of class is higher for older students than younger students. There's also a difference here by grade typically for outside of class. So for students with an A- or higher, they spend about 21 hours per week on their academics outside of class. For those with a C+ or lower, they spend 16 hours a week. And so you can see there that they're partly, the reason for those difference in grades is a significant difference in the hours spent. Those with an A- or higher are spending almost a third more time on their academics than those with a C+ or lower. What does students' current employment look like? So in this year, so since September, about 56% say they are currently employed. It's not that much different than 2018, where about 60% say they were employed. So the pandemic, I might have been expecting the pandemic to potentially have an impact on this, but not seeing a major drop. Students spend about 20.4 hours per week on their employment. Of interest, this is higher than 2018 or 2015, when the average was closer to 18 hours per week. So we are seeing students putting a little bit more hours into their employment, which may be, again, driven by the pandemic. The fact, if they're offsetting perhaps not needing to go to campus, that may open up more time for them potentially to be working out of class. In terms of the impact that the employment has on their academics, 21% say their employment has a positive impact on their academics, 38% say it has no impact, and 41% say it has a negative impact on their academics, which is interesting that there is a group of students who say that working actually has some sort of positive impact. Amongst those who are not employed, 22% are seeking work. So amongst those, there is a group, about 1 in 5 students, who are still looking for work currently and are not working. There are some differences we see amongst employment amongst many groups. Females are more likely to be currently employed. 62% of females are employed compared to 50% of males. We do see some differences here amongst students with grades. So we saw that students were spending less time on their academics outside of class. Part of that is being offset by employment hours. So students with an A- or higher spend about 18.5 hours a week on employment, and those who are getting a C+ or lower, reporting a C+ or lower, spend about 23.5 hours on their employment. So that 5-hour difference, you think about it, is about that 5 hours we saw differently in terms of the hours they're spending outside of class. And so students with lower grades are either working and unable to study as much, or don't want to study as much and are working. It's a chicken or an egg scenario here, but some of those hours seem to be offset by their employment. In terms of students' educational experiences, so now we're getting to what they are doing on campus. And so we asked students 2 questions about their interactions with professors. First, we want to know how well professors are doing. We asked them a number of different items. And so the top 5 areas in terms of how well professors are performing, on the left, seeming knowledgeable about what they're teaching. They treat genders the same, they treat races the same, they're accessible, and they encourage class discussion. So this is based on ratings of performance, and this is the top 5. We also asked students amongst those exact same options, so there's 12 different options students can choose from, to rank what is most important. So this is how they perform. Interestingly, we do not see a very strong correlation between these 2 things. So in terms of what is most important, only one aspect out of the top 5 actually ends up in the top 5 most important, and that is being knowledgeable in their field. What is more important are aspects like communicating well, being well organized, providing useful feedback, and being intellectually stimulating. So things that are actually happening in class. And in terms of where these 5 important areas rank for performance, they rank 6th, 8th, 10th, and 11th. So they rank towards the bottom in terms of performance. So what students are looking for in terms of what is most important to them tend to be that class experience, and what professors are performing more is typically aspects around sort of the components around who the professor is. Do they treat people the same? Are they accessible? Whereas students are putting more importance on that in-class experience. We asked students, did you have the opportunity to evaluate teaching in your courses? And we've seen that 3% said they were not given the opportunity in any of their classes, 14% said some, 28% said most, and 55% said all of their courses. I still believe a lot of students interpret this not as the opportunity, but actually did they fill out their course evaluation. I know a lot of universities have moved to online evaluations where they're open to all students at all times. And so I think a lot of students are reading this question as not necessarily the opportunity, but how much or how often did you fill out those course evaluations? I know given the courses I've taught, about half of students actually fill out their course evaluation if we're lucky, and that sort of, to me, sort of rings around what we're seeing here in terms of these results. So how satisfied are you with the quality of teaching, or students with the quality of teaching? 3% strongly disagree that they're satisfied with the quality of teaching, 13% disagree, the majority agree, and another 16% strongly agree. This is almost exactly the same as the results from 2018 and 2015, so we didn't see any major difference here in terms of the pandemic. Now, of course, these students really only had part of a semester at the end of the 2020 year, the fall semester, and potentially, depending on when they did the survey in the winter of 2021, they may not have had a ton of experience yet with courses moving online or to different formats because of the pandemic. So it may be interesting to see what students, as they're coming into or have more experience, look like in the future. There are also some questions around COVID coming up. You will see where students were actually fairly satisfied with some of the changes that institutions implemented. In terms of perceptions of staff, teaching assistants being helpful and support staff, students generally satisfied with those experience. These are all agreements. So these are people who agreed or strongly agreed. 80% agree or strongly agree that teaching assistants are helpful and that support staff are helpful, 86%. Students' growth and development. So we asked students, how much did your university contribute to your growth and development in a number of different areas, 30 areas to be exact. And so we look at the top 5 areas of contribution to growth and development. And there are top 5, but there are really sort of 2 or 3 that stand out, and that is the ability to find and use information, working independently, and also thinking logically and analytically. And I realize that is the top 5, and I believe there is 6 there. So, I'm not math not my strong suit, it turns out. In terms of the bottom five areas, so again, these are the students who say that the university contributed much or very much. We see at the bottom appreciation of the arts, math, entrepreneurial skills, spirituality, and second or third language skills are seen as less. We do see a number of differences here amongst a variety of groups. In terms of students rating their ability to speak in small groups, younger students believe that the university contributes more to these than older students. Also, we look at students who identify as a visible minority are more likely to say that the university contributes to their second or third language skills. We find males are more likely to say their university contributed to their math skills than females. And also we find that younger students are more likely to say that the university contributed to their cooperative interaction in groups than older students. So in terms of how well the university met their expectations. So we asked them, were your expectations met, exceeded, or did they fall short? 61% said my expectations from the university were met. 20% said they were exceeded, and 19% said they fell short. So we got sort of a nice little balance here on both sides. The higher your grades, the more likely you are to say that your expectations were exceeded. 26% of students with an A- or higher said their expectations were exceeded, compared to just 12% of students with a C+ or lower. Also, these results are fairly in line with 2018, almost no difference here between 2018 results and 2021 results. Our overall evaluations, so we looked at a number of different factors. So these are students who said they were satisfied or very satisfied. So the top 2 points on our 4-point scale. In terms of what they are satisfied with, we asked them a number of different options. Students are most satisfied with their personal safety on campus at 88%, dropping all the way down to the availability of information about their career options in their area down to 60%. We do see a difference here by age. The younger the student is, the more likely they are to say that they are satisfied with the opportunities to develop lasting friendships. And you think about that, if you think about the couple slides ago, we talked about differences by age in terms of students, speaking in groups and cooperative interaction in groups. And so those friendship in groups kind of go hand in hand. In terms of satisfaction with the university. So a couple of different factors. We looked at the overall quality of students' education, the concern for them shown as an individual. The concern for them shown as an individual, skewing slightly to satisfied. The majority, if we add up the 8 and 48%, we're getting 56% are satisfied with the concern shown to them. More are satisfied with the overall quality of their education at almost 9 in 10 students, 86% when we add up those top 2 satisfaction. These are almost, again, on par with 2018 results, almost no difference here. We also looked at if students are satisfied with feeling as if they belong, and if they received good value for money. Very similar results between these 2 questions, again, skewing very much to the agreement, a little more so for belonging to the university than receiving good value for money. We do see, again, a difference here by students' grades, and so the higher the students' grades, the more likely they are to say they received good value for money. 68% of students said they were satisfied or agreed that they received good value for money, compared to only 51% of students with a C+ or lower. So these are 2 new questions to the CUSC graduating student survey, asking about impact of Indigenous education experiences. So 2 new questions for the 2021 survey, asking about their agreement about Indigenous course content enriched their experience, and Indigenous activities or events enriched their experience. Similar ratings, although slightly more on the course content than on the enrich. When you combine the agreement, you see 44% agreed with the course content enriched their experience versus 30% on the activities and events. The interesting part to me is the option we gave students of it being not applicable. In some cases, it is unclear what not applicable might mean. In some cases, not applicable students might be saying, well, there were no Indigenous activities or events. But at the same time, you may have students who are disagreeing with the question because there were no activities or events. And so the not applicable sort of probably includes students who are saying this didn't happen or wasn't available, or didn't experience it. And in some cases, students may not have experienced it, even though it was available to them. And so potentially there is a need, looking at this question into the future, to sort of piece some of these things out. You know, an option of saying, well, these didn't happen versus I did not experience these, which are two different things, right? A university not having these things versus a university who has them and students not experience them tells you, I think, something different. We do see differences here by gender. Females are more likely to agree with both of these statements than males. In terms of recommending their university, oh, my slide is out of order. Slide 30. I don't know where that went. There it is. Flip it over. So this question is asked, this is commonly known as the Net Promoter Score question. It is asked on an 11-point scale from 0 to 10. So it seems like a 10-point scale, but the 0 technically makes an 11-point scale. And what we do is we group students into 3 categories based on their responses. They're grouped into what are called promoters, passives, and detractors based on how they answer. So promoters are students who answer a 9 and 10. Passives are students who answer a 7 or 8, and detractors are those who answer a 6 or lower. And so when we look at the results, we find that 28% of students identify themselves as a promoter, 44% are passive, and 28% are detractors. And so the Net Promoter Score, the score is calculated by taking the percentage of students that are promoters, subtracting the detractors. So this year, the Net Promoter Score is a 0. A couple of interesting things here. So in middle years, the Net Promoter Score when asked is actually a -1. So slightly, you know, lower, but about the same for middle year students. But for first year students, this Net Promoter Score is actually a +14. So there are 14% more percentage point more promoters than there are detractors in first year. So as students move from their first year and then travel through their university education, they're less likely to be promoters of their university. We do also see differences here amongst groups. Group 1 universities have a score of 13 plus 13. Group 2 universities, which are those sort of medium-sized institutions, they have a Net Promoter Score of -7. And Group 3 universities, which are the largest universities, have a Net Promoter Score of +3. When we compare this to 2018, we can see that this is very similar. The Net Promoter Score in 2018 amongst graduates was +1, so almost exactly the same. In terms of students' goal development, and so 33% of students say they have changed a major or program since starting their education. In terms of their career, 34% say they have a specific career, while 21% say they know their careers. In terms of the next year, so following year, 24% of students say they intend to apply directly to a professional program, and 39% plan to apply to graduate school. As students' grade increase, they are more likely to expect to apply to graduate school. 48% of students with an A- or higher expect to apply to graduate school, compared to 19% with a C+ or lower. In terms of steps taken for employment, we ask a number of different steps. And at the end of the day, most students have taken at least some step, although some of these are more, concrete or steps that require effort than others. So at the high end, typically these are things that are a little more less concrete than others. Talking with friends, talking with parents, creating a resume, CV, or some type of e-portfolio. Do find a few differences here by groups. Female students are more likely than male students to say they've volunteered. Younger students are more likely to take in a number of steps, typically talking with friends, talking with family, or creating a CV or resume. We do also see a difference here by grades. Students with higher grades are more likely to say they've talked with a professor about employment. Looking at facilities and services. So I think this is where we start to see some differences now that are pandemic related. So this is the use of services and their satisfaction with services on campus. So we asked students what they have used on campus since September 2020, so in the past basically calendar year. Most commonly is library e-resources at 63%, followed by academic advising and online bookstore, and then the on-campus and bookstore and on-campus library. Almost all of these, use of all of these are down from 2018, from 3 years ago, which are almost primarily pandemic related. Some things we didn't see drop in is there wasn't a huge drop in academic advising. What we do see a drop is things like the bookstores and the library. Of interest, I would have expected library resources to actually seen a jump, given the fact that students, one of the only ways they could access resources was through e-resources. This actually dropped from 72% in 2018 down to 63%. So being off campus for a number of students or being on campus less often potentially resulted in them just using some services less often in general, because you might expect that e-resources, the online campus library, you think some of these things would, or e-resources should increase, on-campus library you think would decrease, and that didn't seem to be the case. We also then asked students, so if they used it, we asked their satisfaction with it. Typically, almost all things receive very high satisfaction, typically 79% or higher, and most of them are typically in the 80, 85, 90% range in terms of satisfaction, except for one, historically, always everyone's favorite, parking, still no one is satisfied with. Even in a pandemic, when no one is going to campus, there should be ample parking available. Only 51% of students are satisfied with parking. So even when no one is there, students still don't like the parking on campus. Now take a look at financing. So always students' least favorite questions to ask, but some of my favorite questions to examine. So when we look at credit cards, 93% of students report having at least one credit card. And amongst those with a credit card, 83% say they do not carry any type of balance on that credit card. The average debt for those carrying credit cards, so if I'm saying I'm carrying debt, is around just over $3,500. This is up a little bit from 2018 with unadjusted inflation numbers. In 2018, it was around $2,800. We do see some differences here by age. The older a student is, the more likely they are to have multiple credit cards. And they're also less likely to say they pay off their balance each month. Also, older students tend to carry more debt on their credit card than younger students. The typical debt for a student 21 and younger is about $1,600, and that increases by age up to almost $7,000 in credit card debt for those 30 and older. Looking at percent with debt, 46% of students say they have accumulated some type of education-related debt, which is slightly lower, but on par with 2018 when it was around 50% of students. In terms of what they're using or where that debt is coming from, student loans by far the most common. That's followed by loans from family, banks, and other sources. And clearly these add up to more than 46%. But of course, many students will rely on multiple sources of debt. These are just the debt they use. But by far the most common type of debt is government student loans. The average debt, so for those who are reporting debt, the average debt they are carrying related to their education is almost $28,500, on par actually with 2018, with unadjusted for inflation numbers in 2018. It was just under $28,000, around $27,900, so very, very similar. In terms of what those debt loads look by students reporting various levels of debt, the biggest source of debt is government student loans. Those with government student loans is $26,000. And again, these clearly, if you add them up, are more than $20,000. But of course, students have debt from multiple sources, averaging out to $28,000. In terms of financing their current year, so how much does it take a student to finance a single year of education? Students calculated it takes them about $17,000 to finance their final year, their graduating year of education, and they use about 2.5 sources to finance their education. So when we look at the sources they use, the most common sources are parents and family, government student loans, work, scholarships, and some work. Those are the 5 most common, but the most common ones don't necessarily yield the highest amounts. Their current work yields the most that they use to finance their education. Scholarships, which are the 4th most used source, contribute only about $2,600 on average to those who are using those sources. So the percentage who are using and the average amount they receive from those sources are different. As you can imagine, there's a multitude of differences here by a number of different groups. Age plays a major factor in here. Older students are less likely to use a number of factors. They're less likely to use parents and family, less likely to rely on scholarships, earnings from summer work, and RESPs. We also see there's a difference here by grades. Students with higher grades are more likely to have received scholarships. Also, we find that younger students rely on more sources. So the younger a student is, the more sources they rely on to finance their year, where older students rely on fewer sources, most commonly their current work. We also find that there's a difference here by age in terms of the average amount required to finance. The older a student is, the more they say is required to finance their education. So around, for those 20 and younger, they say about just under $16,000 required to fund their current year. As you get to students 30 and older, it's almost $25,000. And we know from past qualitative research that we have done that students, when they think about financing their education, often put a number of different things in there. So for example, if I'm older and I'm going to school and I'm, say, for example, I have to put my kids in childcare in order to go to school, I might consider that part of that to be financing my education because I need to pay for childcare in order for me to go to school or go to classes. And so there's a number of factors. So these, for some people, these aren't necessarily what you might call direct expenses and putting some indirect expenses in there. Owning a car, gas, all those sorts of things. So what are students' post-graduation plans? What are they doing after they graduate? So now we're getting into questions that are specific to our postgraduate sample. So in the next 5 years, 68% of students expect to take some type of further education, and it's most commonly they're going to go to graduate school. So as we saw before, it was around, I think it was around 30–40% of students say they were going to apply to graduate school in the next 2 years, but we've stretched it out to 5 years. About half of students expect to go to grad school at some point. About a quarter expect to go to professional programs, 11% taking more undergraduate studies, 6% plan to go to a college, 4% to a technical school, and 11% taking some other type of education. We do find females are more likely than male students to say they plan to take further education in the next 5 years. We also find a difference by grades. The higher a student's grades, the more likely they are to say they plan on taking some sort of further education after. In terms of the impact of debt on further education, 40% of students say I have no debt, therefore it doesn't impact my decisions around further education. Otherwise, about a quarter of students say it discourages them. About 8% say it prevents them, and about 8% say they actually need to take further education to get a higher paying job in order to repay that debt. And 22% say debt, although they may have it, has no effect on their decision. So what are students' employment plans after graduation? So again, this is their expected employment plans. I will say a lot of students, their employment often is a continuation of employment they've had while they're currently studying in their final year. So 31% of students say they have some sort of employment arranged for post-graduation with a median income of around $48,000. When we ask students, are they satisfied with that employment that they've arranged for post-graduation? 86% say they are satisfied. 37% say it requires a specific degree to get that job, and 19% say, well, it just need any type of degree. 65% say that it is related strongly or moderately to the skills and knowledge they have learned. 70% are going to be working in a full-time job, and 66% are going to be in a permanent job. There is some differences here by age. The older a graduate is, the higher the amount they expect their monthly income is going to be. Again, because a lot of these are for often students who are continuing on with jobs that they currently have. When asked how they found their job, how did they arrange for the job, it's sort of all over the place. There's no single way that sort of stands out. Often it's through direct contact with an employer, it's through work experience, websites, friends, all these are typically around the 12 to 19% range. So there's no single way that students seem to be finding their job. It is sort of all over the place. Finally, looking at the impacts of COVID-19. So this is a unique module to the 2021 CUSC survey as an addition to assess the impacts of COVID on students' learning. So for the 2021 survey, CUSC added a module of questions about the impacts on graduating students in their final years. It was an optional module for universities, and I think almost all of the 32 participating universities opted in or to ask these questions. I believe there was just one or potentially two universities who did not want students to be asked this COVID modules. So in terms of the impact, so looking at how students were currently taking, what was their method of instruction during COVID, 90% were taking online or real-time classes, 84% were taking online with modules or recording classes, 16% were still having in-person lectures, and 12% were having in-person labs or studios. So this is out of all students. So students could be having multiple. You might have some online classes with some in-person, but you can see the vast majority of students were taking some type of online component, real-time or recorded online instruction. We asked students about the impact of these changes on their education and their satisfaction with these changes. So 74% of students said that their method of instruction changed from what was anticipated. Based on COVID, did their method of instruction change? So 74% said yes, the method changed from what they would have expected without COVID. And 67% are satisfied with how their university adapted their method of instruction. 12% experienced some sort of change in their external experiential learning experience, and 69% were satisfied with that. 28% said there was a change in their internal experiential learning experience, and 64% were satisfied with that. In terms of the impacts and delays they may have experienced due to COVID, 15% experienced some type of delay in planning to complete their program because of COVID. This was lower than you saw than I believe around 30% of students who experienced some type of delay. This was the delay just simply related to the impacts of COVID. We also asked students, well, did COVID at all impact your ability to access service? So 4% said it was less difficult to access services because of COVID, 52% said it was the same, and 44% said it was actually more difficult to access services because of COVID, which is not surprising given that many may not have been on campus. In terms of their university's efforts to reduce the impact of COVID, 79% were satisfied with the administration of their final exams related to the impact of COVID, and 95% were satisfied with what the university was doing to limit the spread of COVID-19. So there's a lot of interesting information in those COVID modules that for those who participated can dive into. There's a number of questions there, because each institution, of course, would have had its own COVID protocols and impacts and challenges. So as we wrap up and look towards our Q&A, we'll just talk about some of the upcoming events for CUSC. Looking forward to the 2022 survey of first-year students. And so the first-year student survey, for those who are unfamiliar, focuses on really that entry into university. What are the factors that influence their institution? What influenced them to go to university? What influenced them to select the institution that they selected? How satisfied were they with the registration? We look at similar questions that we looked at here in the graduating student survey around satisfaction with services and professors. We look at some of the successes students have had or lack of success in some cases, transitioning to post-secondary from high school or from wherever they were coming from. And we also look at their commitment to completing their studies.